Hey everybody, it's 9 o'clock and 9 o'clock is with me, Father Warner. We are in Friday of the 7th week of Easter. Our text is taken from John chapter 21 verse 15 to 19. I've entitled today's teaching, More Than Words. I'm going to read the text, and then before I explain the text, I want to take a few minutes off to say thank you to some special people, and I'll tell you why. But let's read the text first. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and to go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. After this, he said to him, "Follow me." Now, my dear friends, before I begin to explain this text, I must tell you that, as I said this week, the fathers of St. Stephen's Church were off to Mahabaleshwar. Well, we never landed in Mahabaleshwar. We were on the ghats at Khandala in terrible traffic. Up that slope, surrounded by these large lorries and trucks and many, many cars. And our car began to emit smoke. It broke down, and at the nick of time, we managed to find a spot to stop at a small police outpost where there was a makeshift mechanic. And I cannot tell you that when they opened our car, it just emitted smoke. The car was inside a total wreck. It was a miracle that the three of us in the car were unharmed. I want to say thank you to Kiran and Kanchan, who came to our rescue and got us a place to stay in Lonavala for the next 3 days, and to a family I have never met before but who watches this teaching daily, to Primrose and Glenn Pace and their daughter Shania. I want to, on behalf of all the fathers here at St. Stephen's, say thank you. Like Kiran and Kanchan, you came to us like angels, made us feel completely at home, took us around, took time off from your program to make us feel relaxed and comfortable, got our car fixed. I think it's still being fixed in Lonavala and brought back. But the trouble you took even to come back to Lonavala to pick us up and bring us back to safety, for your faith sharing that you did during that time you were with us. I want to thank God for you, thank God that we are all three safe, and thank God for the angels that He sent us. This is my truest belief, that when you do good, it comes back in your moment of need, and God sends His angels to minister to you. And I say this to all of you, that God sends His angels to minister to you in your moment of need. Having done that, I want to go to the teaching today, because the lectionary, in a run-up to Pentecost that we will celebrate this Sunday, picks up the narrative that we left at Easter. The disciples in the Gospel of John, we know that from John chapter 21 verse 1, 7 of the apostles are mentioned. We are told that they decided to go fishing, prompted by their leader Peter. Now, Peter's actions follow a typical human pattern. An intense spiritual experience soon fades. You go for a retreat, you're very good for 7 days, and then it fades. And one returns to the same thing that he or she has always done, and Peter does exactly that. An intense spiritual experience. Jesus, they have lived with Jesus for 3 years, he has died, and now they go back to their own life, they go back fishing. Now, while verses 1 to 15 of chapter 21 were studied and reflected, if you remember, in the Easter octave, verses 16 onwards, that is today and tomorrow, will round up the Easter narrative. And it is here on the shores of Galilee that Jesus works one last miracle for his, if I may call them, very despondent and dejected disciples. They who could catch nothing the whole night long now encounter, we are told in chapter 21, they encounter the risen Christ in the form of a someone who they don't recognize, but who gives these seasoned fishermen a tip on fishing. And that tip, as we know, paid off, because scripture tells us in verse 11 that they hauled in 153 very large fish. Now, it's interesting to see that the Gospel of John began with a miracle. You remember, in chapter 2, it begins with the wedding at Cana. It now ends with a miracle on the shores of Galilee. Scholars tell us that Jesus must have worked a miracle whereby which he gave to the bride and the bridegroom about 160 gallons of wine. And now 150 very large fish are given in a miracle to the apostles. You see, my dear friends, Jesus never stops loving. He never stops giving. What he did while alive, he continues to do after his resurrection. And now, seated, as we are told in verse 10 of chapter 21, seated around a charcoal fire, eating breakfast with Jesus, it was time now to address another matter that had been unsettled a few days earlier around another charcoal fire. Remember, it was on Maundy Thursday in the house of the high priest. It was around a charcoal fire that Peter had denied the Lord 3 times. 3 times he denied him. So this meeting now must have been a very awkward moment. Our Lord asked Peter the same question thrice, do you love me? And thrice Peter will say, yes, Lord, I love you. You see, Jesus, if you look at the resurrection narrative, had already met with Peter individually on the day of his resurrection. You'll see this also in Luke chapter 24, verse 34. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 5 speaks of Peter's encounter with Jesus on Easter morning. We can only wonder what Jesus and Peter talked about at that first meeting on Easter morning. Nevertheless, it was still important for Jesus to restore Peter in the presence of the other disciples. You see, Jesus didn't ask Peter, Peter, are you sorry for what you did? Or he didn't say, will you promise never to do that again? What did Jesus do today? He challenged Peter to love. You know, it's very interesting to note that Jesus addressed Peter as Simon. Look at your text. Jesus said to Simon, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He addressed Peter as Simon. Perhaps Jesus was making a point to our first pope, a very subtle reminder that he had not stood as a rock in faithfulness to Jesus. And that would be then his name, Peter, which was a rock. Peter had failed to be that rock, and Jesus calls him now Simon to remind him. You see, it was the boast of Peter, if you see in the Gospel of John, chapter 13, verse 37, it was Peter's boast. He says, Lord, I will lay down my life for you. This was his boast of love. And yet when it came, Peter failed the Lord. Predictably, now, when Jesus encounters, and I say predictably, there are no words of chastisement for Peter. You see, you can predict the Lord. He doesn't do something out of the ordinary in terms of love. He doesn't scream at Peter. The Lord has but a simple, yet if I may say a very loaded question for Peter. Do you love me now? Do you love me, Peter? And Peter's heart is now under examination. Jesus is examining his heart. Do you love me? You know, it's very interesting to note that Jesus does not ask us, do you love your archbishop? Do you love your church? Do you love the priests in your parish? Do you love your spouse or your children? He asks Peter and he asks us, do you love me? The love for Christ sets everything right, and all things are then ordered to God's will, to Christ's will. Without our devoted love for Christ, the rest, my dear friends, stands empty, and it stands tremendously hollow. Peter's confession, yes, Lord, I love you, cannot for Jesus just be a matter of words. For Jesus, it must be seen in action. The words of Christ to his church are clear. If you love me, feed my sheep. If you love me, tend to my lambs. You know, to the billion Christians in the world, the message on the eve of Pentecost is clear. If you love Christ, then work for the sheep and work for the lambs. The love of God is seen in our work, not just in our words, and that's why I entitled today's teaching More Than Words. But even more, those we tend to are not ours. Those we tend to are his. Jesus says to Peter, feed my sheep, not feed the sheep. You know, I have said this I've said this very often to myself, that when I am as a pastor appointed to a parish or a congregation, what ought to weigh heavily on my shoulders, on my soul, is that I am a shepherd to the Lord's flock. This is not a post of honor, and I want to say this to every priest watching this. We do not sit on posts of honor, but we sit on posts of service. And on us, my dear fathers and religious sisters and religious priests, on us weighs the burden of the souls of our parishioners. It is for us to feed and tend the lambs and sheep, and not slaughter these lambs and then eat their meat. You know, there is so much today to reflect in this text for priests, us, and for you, my dear friends, the people of God. I want you to reflect on this and choose one wisely. Thank you for listening today. Tomorrow we will come to the last of our teachings before Pentecost Sunday and before the close of the Easter season. As you also know, I will be moving on my sabbatical on the 1st of June. Many of you are asking me whether I will continue to teach. Yes, I will. I will continue to teach. I will try my best to do it every day. I will be traveling also a bit during my sabbatical. I'll be in Malaysia in June, for a few days in Turkey in July, and then I'll let you know. But I will try as faithfully to teach the scriptures each day to you. Thank you, everybody. Please continue to support our children's home in Goa with a meal, either breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Your small contributions on your special occasions make a big difference to our children's lives. And from the 1st of June, if you'd like to offer a Mass, please don't contact me now. But after the 1st of June, if you'd like to offer a Mass, because I will be saying my daily Mass in my private chapel, you are most welcome to send me your prayer petitions and your Mass intentions. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye for now.